He left her with nothing but a check and a sneer. He told her she was nothing without his name, his money, his world. He laughed as she stood in the rain, a pathetic divorced cliché, while he sped off in his Bentley. But Robert Hayes made one fatal mistake. He forgot who she really was. He forgot she was the architect of his success. And he never ever expected to watch his broken ex-wife climb into the private Sikorsky helicopter of the one man in the world he could never ever beat. The air in the 50th floor conference room of Sullivan and Cromwell was so sterile it felt sharp, stinging Clara Hayes's raw, scraped lungs. Every breath was a reminder of the suffocating, silent life she was finally brutally exiting. Across the gleaming mahogany table, her husband, no, ex-husband, she had to practice. The Word leaned back in his leather chair. Robert Hayes wasn't just comfortable. He was dominant. He was a conqueror dividing the spoils, and she was the territory being carved up. "It's a very generous offer, Clara." Robert said, his voice that smooth, patronizing baritone that had once wooed her and now only repulsed. He tapped his pen, a silver Mont Blanc, against the document. "More than generous, considering everything." His lawyer, a shark in a $10,000 suit, nodded silently. Clara's own court-appointed lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed woman named Maria, looked pale. "Generous?" Clara's voice was a dry rasp. "Robert, I found the Kestrel deal. I wrote the investment thesis. I networked for 3 months to get you in the room. I built your reputation." Robert chuckled, a sound that slid under her skin. He leaned forward, lacing his fingers. "Clara, my love, you hosted dinners. You were brilliant at it. You picked out the right wine, you remembered the right names. But let's not rewrite history. You're a brilliant hostess, not a hedge fund manager." He glanced at his own lawyer. "She's emotional. It's understandable." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot iron pressing against her chest. She had been his partner in every sense. In the early days, they were a 2-person team in a tiny apartment fueled by coffee and ambition. She had the Ivy League degree in economics, the analytical mind. He had the charm, the gambler's nerve. But over the years, the narrative had shifted. Her contributions became support. Her research became suggestions. His genius became a solo act. "The house in Greenwich is leveraged to the hilt, Clara. You don't want that debt," he continued, gesturing to the papers. This is clean. A lump sum. Enough for you to get a nice little apartment, maybe take a pottery class. Find yourself." He was giving her crumbs from the empire she had helped bake. But she was trapped. He had systematically moved all assets into corporate holdings and offshore trusts she couldn't touch. Her name was on nothing but a joint checking account in the deed to a house that was more liability than asset. To fight him would mean years in court, her life bleeding away in depositions, all while he painted her as a bitter, grasping woman. She looked down at the signature line. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen. The scratch of it on the heavy paper was the sound of her past life ending. "There," she said, sliding it back. Robert smiled. It didn't touch his eyes. He stood buttoning his custom-tailored suit. His wrist flashed, revealing the complex face of a Richard Mille watch, one she'd bought him after the Kestrel deal closed. "Good. This is for the best, Clara. You'll see." He pulled a checkbook from his inner pocket, scribbled, and tore it out with a crisp zip. He slid it across the table. "A little something to tide you over until the settlement wires. Don't spend it all in one place." It was $50,000. To him, it was pocket change. To her, it was an insult. He walked out without a backward glance, his lawyer gathering the files. Clara and Maria were left in the tomb-like silence. "You'll be okay, Clara," Maria said, but her voice was hollow. Clara just nodded. She gathered her worn-out Prada handbag, a relic from a life that now felt like a dream, and walked to the elevator. Down in the lobby, the heavens had opened. A sheet of cold November rain lashed the streets of Manhattan. Robert was just getting into his midnight blue Bentley, a driver holding an umbrella. In the passenger seat, Clara could see a flash of blonde hair. Isabella, the 24-year-old social media strategist he'd been seeing for 6 months. Robert glanced up and saw her standing under the building's sterile awning. He didn't wave. He just gave her that small, pitying smirk. It was a look that said, "You are nothing. Fall apart. I'm waiting to watch." The Bentley pulled into traffic and disappeared. Clara Hayes stood there clutching a $50,000 check, the wind whipping the rain into her face. She was 42 years old, homeless, jobless, and utterly, devastatingly alone. He was right. She was a cliché. And as the first cold tear mixed with the rain, she truly believed she was about to fall apart. The first 3 weeks were a blur of beige. Beige walls in a tiny one-bedroom rental on the Upper East Side, so far east it was practically in the river. Beige linoleum. Beige coffee from a beige Mr. Coffee machine. Clara had spent the first week in a fog of shock, the second in a rage that had no target, and the third in a deep, hollow depression. Robert's words echoed in the tiny rooms. A brilliant hostess. Find yourself. Fall apart. She would go for walks in Central Park watching the powerful women in their Loro Piana cashmere and their sleek ponytails jogging with a purpose, barking orders into AirPods. That used to be her. Or at least she'd worn the same uniform. Now she was invisible. One rainy Tuesday she was unpacking the last of the boxes the personal effects Robert's assistant had so kindly packed and sent over. It was mostly old photo albums, college textbooks, and clothes she hadn't worn in years. At the bottom of a box marked "Office Old," she found it. It wasn't a photo album or a diary. It was a black moleskin notebook. Her hand brushed over the embossed cover. She hadn't seen it in years. She'd thought it was lost in the Greenwich move. She sat on the floor, the box spilling open. She opened the cover. Her own handwriting stared back at her. But it wasn't the neat cursive script of a hostess writing thank you notes. It was the frantic, brilliant scrawl of her old self, the analyst, the strategist. The book was filled with equations, market projections, and clipped-out articles. And then in the back she found the pages she was looking for. It was titled Project Eris. It was the idea after Kestrel, the one she had been working on in secret, the one she had been too afraid to show Robert, fearing he'd steal it, or worse, laugh at it. It was a thesis on sustainable aerospace. Not just electric planes that was old news. This was a deep dive into carbon capture propulsion systems. A theoretical engine that didn't just not pollute but actually cleaned the air as it flew, using atmospheric CO2 as part of its fuel catalyst. It was insane, it was brilliant, and it was hers. She read her own notes, her mind rusty and fogged by trauma slowly clicking back into gear. She'd identified target companies' potential patent pathways and a list of material science experts who were on the cutting edge. He forgot this. She thought, a spark igniting in the beige numbness. He dismissed me so completely he forgot my mind. She went to her laptop, a modest new MacBook she'd bought with Robert's insult check. She started typing. She cross-referenced her old notes with new data. The field had advanced. What was theoretical 5 years ago was now on the cusp of reality. She worked for 72 hours straight, fueled by beige coffee and a sudden violent hunger to be someone again. She mapped out the entire ecosystem. The problem wasn't the science. It was the capital. It required a specific type of investor, someone with vision, deep pockets, and a foothold in both tech and heavy industry. She found a name, Nicholas Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, the oracle of aerospace, a reclusive, press-shy billionaire who had built an empire on impossible technologies. He was the one investor Robert had always wanted to meet, but had never been able to get into a room with. Robert despised him for his quiet, unflashy success. Clara's heart hammered. Sterling was a ghost. He didn't do public appearances. She dug deeper. Trawling through niche industry blogs, she found a mention. Sterling was rumored to be giving a rare keynote, not at a major conference like Davos or Sun Valley, but at a small, hyper-exclusive gathering, the Aero Innovate Summit in Aspen, in 2 weeks. Attendance was invitation only or a $25,000 patron ticket. Clara looked at her bank account. The settlement money had wired, but it was locked in a high-yield account her lawyer had set up, and she'd promised not to touch the principal. All she had liquid was the $50,000 from Robert minus the rent and the laptop. She had about $30,000 left. It was a gamble. A wild, insane bet-the-farm gamble. She would be walking into a lion's den of billionaires and aerospace titans, a nobody in a rented suit. She would have one shot, if that, to get 5 minutes with a man who didn't talk to anyone. She thought of Robert's smirk. Fall apart. Not today, she whispered to the empty room. She booked the ticket. She booked a room at the budget-friendly Limelight Hotel, not the opulent St. Regis, where the conference was being held. She spent $2,000 on a single impeccably tailored suit from the Row. She wasn't just going to Aspen to find an investor. She was going to resurrect herself. The St. Regis Aspen was a different world. The air was thin and crisp, and the money was so old it was silent. Men and women drifted through the lobby in $5,000 shearling coats and casual hiking boots that cost more than Clara's rent. Clara, in her severe perfect navy suit, felt like a fraud. She'd spent the morning in the back row of the main ballroom listening to panels on propulsion ethics and asteroid mining. Her $25,000 badge felt like a scarlet letter. And then she saw him. Robert Hayes. He was standing near the Titanium Sponsors Lounge holding court with a group of men in Brioni suits. He was laughing that big, booming laugh that commanded a room. And next to him, clinging to his arm, was Isabella, looking impossibly young in a white ski bunny outfit. Clara's blood ran cold. What was he doing here? This wasn't his sector. He was trying to break in. He was using the reputation she built to pivot into the next big thing. She tried to slip past to fade into the wallpaper, but his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, found her. His smile widened, but it was all teeth. Clara. My God. He walked toward her, his entourage watching. Isabella hung back, looking bored. Robert, Clara said, her voice tight. She tried to keep walking. He put a hand on her arm, stopping her. His grip was proprietary. I have to say I'm shocked to see you here. I didn't realize they were hiring new wait staff. Or are you just finding yourself? The men behind him chuckled. Isabella giggled. Clara felt the heat rise in her face. The public humiliation was a fresh slap. I'm an attendee, Robert. An attendee? He looked at her badge, his eyes narrowing in mock confusion. A patron ticket, Clara. That's what that little check was for, wasn't it? Oh, honey. He turned to his friends. This is my ex-wife, Clara. She's exploring her hobbies. It's adorable. Excuse me. Clara said, her voice shaking with repressed fury. She pulled her arm free and walked away, not to the next panel, but straight through the glass doors and onto the freezing terrace. She leaned against the stone balustrade, her hands gripping the cold rock. The mountains were breathtaking, a cruel, beautiful backdrop to her shame. She fought back tears, refusing to give him the satisfaction. He's wrong, you know. The voice was deep and quiet. It came from her left. She turned, startled. A man was standing in the shadow of the alcove nursing a simple black coffee. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing a plain black turtleneck and dark jeans. He was lean with sharp features and intense, observant eyes that seemed to see right through her. What? She said, wiping her eyes angrily. What? He said. You're not exploring a hobby. He took a step forward, not crowding her but joining her at the railing. You've been in the main ballroom since 8 a.m. You weren't networking. You were listening. You took notes on Dr. Eris's quantum drive lecture. Nobody takes notes on that unless they actually understand the math. Clara stared at him. You were watching me. I watch everyone, he said simply. I'm Nicholas. He didn't offer a last name. He didn't need to. Clara's heart stopped. It was him, Nicholas Sterling. He looked nothing like his one grainy press photo. He looked younger, more intense, and infinitely more tired. Clara, she managed to say. Clara Hayes. His eyes sharpened at the name. Hayes. As in Hayes Capital. As in formerly Hayes, she said, bitterness creeping in. Ah. He nodded, a complete story understood in a single sound. So Robert Hayes is the he I'm referring to. That makes sense. He's a peacock. All flash, no substance. He's been trying to get a meeting with me for a year. I don't take meetings with peacocks. A bubble of hysterical laughter rose in Clara's throat. He told his friends I was the waitstaff. He's an idiot, Nicholas said with no particular venom. It was a statement of fact. He wouldn't know a quantum drive from a golf cart. You, on the other hand. He looked at her, his gaze analytical. You were here for a reason. You paid $25,000 for that badge. You're not here for the cocktails. So, what is it? It was the moment, the one she'd paid for. But it was all wrong. She was crying. She was humiliated. I have an idea, she stammered. A project. A thesis. But it's not the right time. There's never a right time, he said, sipping his coffee. There's just now. You have 60 seconds. The bluntness shocked her out of her self-pity. The analyst kicked in. Okay. She took a deep breath, turning to face him. Everyone here is focused on efficiency. Electric hydrogen SAF. They're all trying to get to net zero. They're wrong. Wrong? He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Net zero is a losing game. It's damage control. The solution isn't to stop polluting. The solution is to reverse it. We need engines that are carbon negative. We need propulsion systems that actively remediate the atmosphere as a function of their operation. She stopped, waiting for him to laugh. Nicholas Sterling was very still. He looked at her for a long, silent moment. The air crackled between them. How? He asked. Direct air capture catalysts integrated into a turbine's bypass flow. She said the words high risk. Using captured CO2, processing it in a microreactor on board, and using the resulting syngas as a supplemental fuel source. It's a closed-loop system that cleans the air it flies through. She had said it. The core of Project Eris. He didn't speak. He just stared at the mountains, his mind clearly working at a speed she could barely comprehend. Robert and his cronies were visible through the glass, laughing over champagne. Finally, Nicholas turned back to her. The power-to-weight ratio would be a nightmare, and the heat from the microreactor would melt the turbine casing. Not if the reactor isn't chemical but electrochemical, Clara countered, her voice gaining strength. And you could use the heat as a secondary energy source to reduce the electrical load, solving the power problem. The math works. I've run the models. He was looking at her now with an entirely new expression. It wasn't pity. It wasn't intrigue. It was respect. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple black business card. It had only his name, a phone number, and an email. I'm at the Little Nell. My team is set up in the penthouse. Send me your models. He paused. And Mrs. Hayes? Clara, she corrected him. Clara, don't let that peacock ever see you cry again. It's a waste of good salt. He turned and walked back inside, disappearing into the crowd before Clara could even say thank you. She looked down at the card. It was heavy in her hand, heavier than Robert's insult check, heavier than her entire settlement. It was the weight of a chance. Clara didn't sleep. She went back to her modest room at the Limelight, triple-checked her models, and wrote the most important email of her life. She attached her 80-page thesis for Project Eris, a document of meticulous research and daring projections. She hit send at 3:14 a.m. She expected to wait days, maybe weeks. She expected a polite rejection from a subordinate. Her phone buzzed at 7:00 a.m. It was an unknown number. Clara Hayes. It's Nicholas Sterling. My team and I have been up all night. The math holds. Clara sat bolt upright in her hotel bed. It's rough, and your material science is 3 years out of date, but the core thesis is sound. Brilliant, even. He sounded energized, excited. "Can you be at the Little Nell in 30 minutes? My R&D head is on a secure line from our skunk works. He wants to talk to you." "Yes," Clara said, already halfway out of bed. "I'll be there." The meeting was a whirlwind. It wasn't a pitch anymore. It was a strategy session. For 3 hours, she and Sterling's team, a group of terrifyingly smart engineers and physicists, whiteboarded the idea. They poked holes, and Clara, her mind finally free and firing on all cylinders, filled them. She wasn't a hostess. She wasn't an ex-wife. She was the smartest person in the room. When it was over, Nicholas walked her to the elevator. "You're not an analyst, Clara," he said. "You're a visionary. I want to fund this. Not just seed money. I want to build a new division at Sterling Dynamics around this. And I want you to run it." Clara's knees went weak. "Run it, Nicholas, for first to... I haven't managed a team in..." "You don't need to manage," he cut her off, not unkindly. "You need to lead. I can teach you the operations. I can't teach your brain." They were set to sign a preliminary agreement the next day. Clara walked back to her hotel on air, the world sharp and vivid for the first time in a year. And that's when Robert Hayes struck. He must have seen her leaving the Little Nell. He must have seen the look on her face. Or maybe he'd just heard the rumors that always leak from a billionaire's suite. He didn't confront her. He did something far worse. He poisoned the well. Robert still had contacts everywhere. He was a master of the back channel, the quiet word in the right ear. He started making calls. He painted a picture of a woman unhinged by divorce. "She's vindictive," he told a journalist at Forbes. "She's unstable. She found some of my old research notes. I was toying with an aerospace idea years ago, and she's trying to pass them off as her own. It's tragic, really. I hope she gets the help she needs." He leaked doctored emails to a board member at Sterling Dynamics, emails that seemed to show him discussing the heiress concept with Clara, positioning her as a mere assistant. The first sign of trouble was an email from Nicholas's COO. "We need to pause the agreement. Some troubling information has come to light regarding the IP's provenance." Clara's blood turned to ice. She called Nicholas directly. "My board is spooked, Clara," he said, his voice flat angry. "Robert Hayes is persuasive. He's claiming intellectual property theft. He says you're mentally unstable. He's threatening an injunction." "It's a lie," Clara shouted, pacing her tiny room. "Every bit of it is a lie. I have the original notebook. I have the metadata." "I know," Nicholas said, and the quiet belief in his voice kept her from shattering. "But my board is full of old money conservatives. They hate messy PR and they hate litigation. Hayes is threatening to drag this and you through the mud. They see you as a liability." "So what happens?" she whispered, her dream turning to ash. "He's winning," Nicholas said, and she could hear the frustration in his voice. "He's managed to kill it. The board won't approve the funding with this litigation risk hanging over us. I'm sorry, Clara. He's buried it." The line went quiet. He was giving her time. Clara hung up. The elation of the morning was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury she had never felt before. He hadn't just humiliated her. He hadn't just stolen her past. He had now actively stolen her future. He thought she was a broken, emotional woman. He thought she would cry and give up. He thought she was a liability. She looked at her laptop. "He's a peacock," Nicholas had said. "All flash, no substance." And he was sloppy. Arrogant people were always sloppy. "You want to talk about IP, Robert?" she whispered to the empty room. "Let's talk about IP." Clara Hayes was not a liability. She was a weapon. And Robert had just handed her the ammunition. She sat at her laptop, but she wasn't looking at Project Eris. She was in the digital attic of her old life. When she'd been Mrs. Hayes, she had managed their entire digital ecosystem, servers, cloud backups, network security. It was part of the hostess job, ensuring the smart home in Greenwich worked, that the calendars synced. Robert, in his arrogance, had changed all the primary passwords. But he hadn't changed the fail-safes. He hadn't scrubbed the shared archives. He hadn't remembered the encrypted server she herself had set up, a place where they used to back up everything from family photos to early business plans. She typed in a password, Kestrel 19. Access denied. She tried another RNCU Forever 2010. Access denied. She smiled grimly. Of course. She tried the one she knew he would never think to change because he'd never known it existed. It was the serial number of the cheap beige Mr. coffee machine from their first tiny apartment. MC89TT44P. Access granted. She was in. It was all there. A digital timeline of their life and his lies. She ignored the photos, the memories. She went straight to a folder labeled Archive Haze Cap Alpha. And she found it. Not just her moleskin notebook, but the scanned pages of it dated 6 years ago, followed by a Word document created a week later where Robert had taken her scrawled notes and put them into a presentation deck with his name on the cover. She found the original pitch for the Kestrel deal. Not the one he'd presented, but the first draft. It was a 50-page analysis, and the metadata on the file was clear. Author Clara M. Hayes. Created October 14, 2017. Last modified by Robert P. Hayes, October 20, 2017. He hadn't just stolen her idea. He'd stolen her file and saved over it. But the original data was still there, buried in the document's properties. She had him cold. This was the proof she needed for Nicholas. She could clear her name. But as she scrolled through the server, she found something else. Something newer. Something she wasn't looking for. A folder labeled Hydra. She opened it. It was full of spreadsheets, wire transfer confirmations, and coded emails. It wasn't old IP. This was current. This was this week. Clara's blood ran cold. It was a market manipulation scheme. Robert was using his network to artificially inflate the stock of a small biotech firm, planning to short sell it on the day of its fake bad clinical trial news. He was coordinating with journalists to leak the information and had offshore accounts ready to catch the profits. It wasn't just unethical, it was highly spectacularly illegal. It was wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy. He's gotten sloppy, she thought. He's gotten greedy. She now had two choices. 1. The bomb. She could leak Hydra. She could send it to the SEC and the Wall Street Journal. It would destroy him. He would be disbarred, investigated, and possibly jailed. His firm would collapse. Isabella would be gone in an hour. It would be total annihilation. 2. The stiletto. She could use the Kestrel files, the IP theft, to clear her name with Sterling's board. It was the clean, professional, and moral path. She thought about the humiliation, the waitstaff comment, the unstable smear. The temptation to use the bomb was overwhelming, to watch him burn. But she looked at the Project Eris file on her desktop. If she leaked Hydra, the resulting explosion would be messy. Her name would be tied to his in every headline, "Fallen Mogul's ex-wife leaks files." She would be the vindictive woman he'd claimed she was. The board at Sterling Dynamics would be even more spooked by the media circus. She wouldn't win. She'd just be the woman who took Robert Hayes down. She'd be defined by him forever. No. She wasn't a demolition crew. She was an architect. She saved the Kestrel files to a secure thumb drive. She saved the Hydra files to a separate encrypted drive. She didn't call Nicholas Sterling's COO. She didn't call his lawyers. She called Nicholas directly. "I need to see you," she said, her voice a flat, cold sheet of steel. "In person, not in Aspen. In New York. Tonight." "Clara, I told you the board—" "This isn't for your board." Clara cut him off. "This is for you. I have something you need to see. It's not about Robert. It's about my credibility, and it's about the kind of man your board is allowing to dictate your company's future." There was a long pause. "Where?" Nicholas asked. "The Metropolitan Legacy Ball. Tonight. At the Met." That's one of the hardest tickets in New York, Clara. It's not. Robert will be there, she said. He's co-chairing. I know you were invited. I know you declined. Please, re-accept. Find me at 10 p.m. by the Temple of Dender. I promise you after tonight your board will have no more questions. Another pause, longer this time. 10 p.m., he said and hung up. Clara stood up. She had the evidence. She had the leverage. And she had the perfect public stage for a showdown. She looked at her one good suit from the row. It wouldn't do. She took Robert's $30,000, walked to Bergdorf Goodman, and prepared for war. The great hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a sea of power, a glittering ocean of old money and new ambition. Clara Hayes moved through it like a ghost in a new skin. She had spent the last of Robert's money on a dress that was not a dress, but a statement. It was a stark architectural column of midnight blue silk by Schiaparelli. It wasn't sexy. It was dangerous. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon, and the only jewelry she wore was a pair of diamond studs she'd bought for herself in her 20s. She was no longer the beige, broken woman. She was a blade. She spotted Robert almost immediately. He was holding court near the grand staircase, Isabella dripping in diamonds at his side. He was at the apex of his world, the co-chair of the ball, the king of his own story. He saw Clara, and his eyes did a double-take. He saw the dress, the confidence. He saw a stranger. A flicker of, was it fear? Crossed his face before he masked it with a possessive, calculating smile. He thought she was there to beg. Clara ignored him. She bypassed the champagne, bypassed the small talk, and walked directly to the Egyptian wing. The Temple of Dender was illuminated in a soft golden light, the reflecting pool casting shimmers on the ancient stone. It was quieter here. And as promised, Nicholas Sterling was waiting, leaning against a pillar, a glass of water in his hand, looking perfectly out of place in a flawless tuxedo. "You came," Clara said. "You were compelling," he replied. His eyes scanned her, taking in the transformation. "This is a different look from Aspen. That was a uniform. This is armor." She got straight to the point. "Nicholas Robert didn't just suggest I was unstable. He provided proof to your board, didn't he? He sent my COO Frank a series of doctored emails," Nicholas said, his jaw tightening, "making it look like Eris was his idea and you were emotional." "Here," Clara said, pulling a slim silver thumb drive from her small clutch. "This is the original metadata from the Kestrel deal, the one that made his name. It proves unequivocally that I was the author. It proves a pattern of intellectual property theft. It's time-stamped, unredactable, and will be admissible in any court." Nicholas took the drive. "This is good. This will help me fight the board. It proves he's a liar." "It's not for the board," Clara said. "It's for you. So you know who you're dealing with. The board, they get nothing. Because I'm not going to ask them for a job. I'm going to tell them how it's going to be. But first, I have to take out the trash." Before Nicholas could respond, a voice boomed across the stone floor. "Well, well, this is cozy." Robert Hayes was marching toward them, Isabella trailing nervously. His face was a mask of controlled fury. He'd seen her with Sterling, and his narcissistic possessiveness had exploded. "Nicholas, I'm surprised to see you here, and with Clara, trying to poach my old talent, or just slumming it." Nicholas said nothing. He just watched Clara. "Robert," Clara said, her voice calm and cold. "You look well." "Cut the crap, Clara." He snarled, his voice low. "What is this? What are you doing trying to embarrass me? You're out of your league. This little Project Eris fantasy I made you and I broke you. It's over. Go home. Go back to your sad little apartment before you humiliate yourself further." He was so confident, so utterly, fatally sure of his power. Clara smiled. It was a thin, terrible smile. "You know, Robert, I was just telling Nicholas about my old files. You were always so sloppy with your digital backups." Robert's smile faltered. The flicker of fear returned. What are you talking about? I was looking for the Kestrel files, the ones I wrote, and I found them. The metadata is fascinating. Robert's face went white. He grabbed her arm. You bitch! Clara didn't flinch. Get your hand off me. She pulled her arm away. But you know what's even more fascinating, your Hydra protocol. The color drained from Robert's face completely. He looked for the first time like the weak, terrified man she'd always known was underneath the bluster. Isabella looked back and forth, confused. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. The biotech firm, the offshore accounts, the Wall Street Journal reporter on your payroll, the coordinated short sell. Clara listed them off, her voice like ice chips. I have it all, Robert. Every file, every email, every wire transfer. Robert was speechless. He was imploding. You wouldn't, he whispered. You'd be implicated. It's our server. Was it? Clara said. It looks like your server, your personal venture. I'm just a hostess. Remember, what would I know about wire fraud? She had him. He was completely and totally at her mercy. Nicholas Sterling stepped forward. He hadn't moved a muscle, but his presence was immense. Mr. Hayes, Nicholas said, his voice quiet but carrying the finality of a gavel. I believe you have 2 calls to make. The first is to my COO to inform him you are retracting your concerns about Mrs. Hayes's project. The second is to your lawyers. You're going to need them. Robert just stared, his mouth opening and closing. Clara turned to Nicholas. Thank you for coming, but I think our business is concluded for the evening. Not quite, Nicholas said. He looked at his watch. My board is impatient. They're gathered in the Hamptons for an emergency early morning session. I promised them a primary source. The Hamptons now, Clara said. The traffic even at this hour. Robert let out a broken, hysterical laugh. You'll never make it. It'll take 3 hours. The board will be asleep. Oh, we're not driving, Nicholas said. He offered his arm to Clara. Shall we? Clara looked at Robert one last time. He was a broken statue, a ruin in a tuxedo. She felt nothing. No pity, no triumph. Just an ending. She took Nicholas's arm. They walked out of the museum, past the stunned onlookers, past Isabella, who was frozen in place. They didn't walk to the line of black cars. They walked 3 blocks south to the Wall Street heliport. Robert, followed by a confused Isabella, stumbled after them, watching in disbelief. There on the pad, gleaming under the city lights, was a Sikorsky S-76, a sleek black corporate predator. The tail number was N. Sterling. The pilot saluted. Nicholas helped Clara in. She settled into the plush leather seat. As the rotors began to spin up, a deafening thwop, 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 drowning out the city. Clara looked out the window. Robert Hayes was standing on the cold pavement, his black tie askew, the wind from the downdraft whipping his suit. He looked small, pathetic, defeated. Clara didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply turned her head, faced forward, and as the helicopter lifted off, soaring over the East River, she didn't look back. The noise of the gala. The city and the shell of Robert Hayes evaporated in an instant, replaced by the rising, powerful thwop, thwop, thwop of the turbine blades. The Sikorsky S-76, a machine of precise predatory power, lifted off the pad with a smoothness that defied its own weight. Clara felt a lurch, not in her stomach, but in her soul. They banked over the East River, the lights of Manhattan unfurling beneath them like a carpet of fallen stars. From this height, the city was a silent, glittering masterpiece. It was a view she had seen before, but only from the static, glass-walled prison of Robert's penthouse. His view. His city. This was different. This was not static. This was movement. This was escape. This was ascent. She looked down at the Metropolitan Museum, now just a brightly lit rectangle in the vast darkness of Central Park. Robert was still down there, a microscopic speck of rage and humiliation anchored to the pavement, staring up at the life that was leaving him behind. "This is substantially better than the subway," Clara said into her headset microphone, her voice surprisingly steady. Nicholas, sitting opposite her in the plush corporate quiet cabin, gave a rare, genuine smile. It lit his intense features. "The LIRR is a close second, but we're on a clock. You ready?" "I was born ready for this, Nicholas," she said. "I just forgot it for a decade." "Good." He handed her an encrypted military-grade tablet. "My board is patched in. They're on a secure video line. They've all read your original thesis. They've all heard Frank's panic about Robert's IP claim. Now they get to hear from you." A moment later, a dozen faces materialized on the screen. They were exactly as she'd pictured, a jury of silver-haired men, all in expensive casual wear from their Hamptons estates, looking variously annoyed, skeptical, and intrigued. Frank, the COO, was front and center, his face a tight mask of disapproval. "Mr. Sterling, this is highly irregular." Frank began, his voice tinny over the comms. "We are supposed to be mitigating risk, not flying it to a midnight board meeting." "Frank, be quiet," Nicholas said, his voice in easy command. "Everyone, this is Clara Hayes, the mind behind Project Eris. As of approximately 30 minutes ago, Robert Hayes has officially retracted all claims against her and her intellectual property. He did so with prejudice. Clara, the floor is yours." The faces on the screen blinked, registering this new information. The power dynamic had just shifted, and Clara was holding the lever. She took a deep breath, the helicopter's vibration a steadying hum beneath her. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice as clear and cold as the air outside her window. "For the last decade, you've been in a race to achieve net zero. You've spent billions trying to win a game of damage control. I'm here to tell you you are running in the wrong direction." "Ms. Hayes," Frank cut in, "with all due respect, your projections on catalyst efficiency are optimistic. They defy current material science." "They don't defy it, Mr. Daniels." Clara countered, her mind snapping into the sharp analytical focus she had missed like a limb. "They leverage it. Your teams are still working with chemical catalysis. I'm talking about electrochemical plasma. We don't just filter the carbon. We crack it. We use the bypass air not as a problem, but as a fuel source. The math is on the drive I sent you. It's not optimistic. It's just new." She didn't just present a propulsion system, she presented a new world economy. She spoke of carbon remediation credits that would make the engines profitable before they even left the ground. She spoke of retrofitting existing airline fleets, turning them from liabilities into assets. She laid out a 10-year plan that didn't just make Sterling Dynamics a part of the future, it made them the architect of it. She was not a hostess, she was not a victim. She was a visionary, and for the first time she had the full, undivided attention of the men who could build her vision. By the time the helicopter was descending over the dark, manicured lawns of Southampton, the board was silent. The skeptical looks were gone, replaced by the greedy, excited gleam of men who had just seen a unicorn. The old silver-haired chairman, a man whose name was on half the buildings at Yale, was the first to speak. His voice was a gravelly rumble. "Ms. Hayes, that was the single most compelling pitch I've heard in 20 years. Frank, get the paperwork drawn up. Full funding for a new division. And get her whatever she needs. Welcome to Sterling Dynamics." The call ended. The screen went black. The helicopter settled onto a private illuminated pad with the gentlest of bumps. The turbines began to wind down, the deafening thwop-thwop slowing to a sigh. In the sudden, profound silence, Clara looked at Nicholas. "You didn't just win, Clara," he said, unbuckling. "I just wanted my work back." She said, her voice raw with an emotion she couldn't yet name. "You got more than that." He helped her out onto the damp grass. The salty night air smelled of pine and old money. "You got your name back." The aftermath was not the loud explosion Clara had braced for. It was a quiet, seismic, and irreversible shift in the tectonic plates of power. In the first few weeks, headquartered in a gleaming new office at the Sterling Tower, Clara faced her first major decision. The encrypted Hydra drive sat in her desk drawer. One call to the Wall Street Journal, One leak to the SEC and Robert Hayes would be in handcuffs by morning. The temptation was a physical, bitter taste in her mouth. She thought of him calling her waitstaff. She thought of his smirk. But then she looked at the whiteboards lining her new office covered in equations. She looked at the team of engineers she was building, the brightest minds in the country. She wasn't a demolitions expert. She was an architect. To leak the file would be to define herself by his destruction. It would be an act of revenge, and revenge was the currency of victims. Her victory had to be clean. It had to be about her success, not his failure. She placed the drive in a bank's safe deposit box, an insurance policy she hoped never to cash, and got to work. She didn't need to do anything. In his panic, Robert did it all for her. Knowing Clara held an axe over his head, he'd tried to unwind his Hydra scheme. But a complex securities fraud scheme is a house of cards. You can't just pull one out. His panicked, clumsy selling triggered automated alerts at the SEC. His co-conspirators, sensing his fear, tried to get their money out first. The whole thing collapsed in on itself. The first tremor was a small headline in the Financial Times: Hayes Capital halts trading amid liquidity fears. The second was a page 6 item showing Isabella the blonde strategist on a yacht in St. Bart's with a new hedge fund manager. The real earthquake, however, came 3 months later. Clara was in the Mojave Desert on the sun-baked tarmac of the Sterling Dynamics Skunk Works, arguing with an aerospace engineer about thrust-to-weight ratios. She was wearing a hard hat and steel-toed boots covered in dust and had never been happier. Her new assistant ran out holding a magazine. "Director Hayes, you need to see this." It was the new issue of Forbes. On the cover was her. It was a stunning, powerful photograph. She wasn't in a gown. She was in her element, standing in front of the massive, gleaming prototype of the Ares 1 engine casing. The wind was in her hair. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon. The headline, "The Phoenix Project: How Clara Hayes and Sterling Dynamics Are Building a Carbon-Negative Sky." She read the article, her heart hammering. It was all about her models, her vision, her leadership. And then buried in the fourth paragraph was the single brutal and perfectly crafted line that ended her old life for good: Ms. Hayes, widely seen as the visionary force behind Sterling's multi-billion-dollar pivot, was once married to disgraced financier Robert Hayes. Mr. Hayes, whose firm Hayes Capital collapsed last month and is currently under federal investigation for securities fraud, was unavailable for comment. Sources say Ms. Hayes was the uncredited analyst behind his only major successful venture, the 2017 Kestrel deal. That was it. He wasn't the subject. He wasn't even an anecdote. He was a parenthetical, a footnote in her story. His reputation built on her work was annihilated by the simple public telling of the truth. The Greenwich house was seized. His name was mud. A year later, Clara stood on that same tarmac. The Ares 1 was no longer a prototype casing. It was a fully integrated engine bolted to a test stand bristling with sensors. The vast shimmering heat of the Mojave Desert was broken by the buzz of the command center. Nicholas was beside her, but he wasn't holding her hand. He was holding a clipboard watching her. Their partnership had become the most formidable in the industry, built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated respect. "Nervous, Director?" he asked. Clara looked at the monstrous, beautiful engine, the physical manifestation of an idea she'd had in a notebook 5 years ago. "Terrified," she said with a grin. "And I can't wait." She nodded to the test flight engineer. "Director Hayes," the engineer said, her voice crackling over the comms from the safety of the bunker. "We are green across the board. The system is yours. On your mark." Clara stood up, looking at the engine, and beyond it the wide blue polluted sky. She keyed her microphone, her voice clear and strong, carrying over the desert wind. "Ignition. Take her up. Let's go clean the sky." Clara's story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about proving that your value is never ever determined by the person who fails to see it. She didn't just find a new life. She built one from the very blueprints her ex-husband tried to steal and bury. She didn't need to destroy him with the evidence she had. His own arrogance and greed did that for her. She just needed to be brilliant. What did you think of Robert's downfall? Was it karma, or was it simply the inevitable gravitational pull of his own arrogance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of triumph and vindication, please do us a huge favor and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own power, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more dramatic stories where the underestimated always get the last word. Click that notification bell so you never miss a single upload. Thank you for listening.